The silence in our hallway felt heavier than the humid air outside. I had only returned for a forgotten hard drive, but under the soft glow of the Christmas lights, I found the end of my life. My husband stood behind a girl in a scarlet gown, his hand lingering on her zipper. He turned pale the moment he saw me. I thought I was witnessing a simple betrayal, but I had just stumbled into a war I never asked to fight. My name is Victoria Lane, but everyone calls me Tori. At 33, I thought I had firmly secured my place in the world here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle of my career as the event manager for the Bright Nest Arts Foundation. We were hosting the Christmas charity gala at the Magnolia Crest Club, a venue that smelled of old money, pine needles, and exclusion. My husband, Graham Calloway, was the primary sponsor. Standing there in my satin gown earlier that evening, watching him charm the board of directors, I felt a familiar surge of pride. I was the middle-class girl who had married the city's most eligible real estate mogul, and I told myself I belonged here. The gala was in full swing when the audio system for the silent auction glitched, sending a screeching feedback loop through the ballroom. My assistant looked ready to faint. I knew I had the backup hard drive with the pre-recorded ambiance tracks sitting on my desk at home. It was a 20-minute round trip if I hurried. I handed my headset to my assistant. That hard drive was supposed to save the event, but as I ran to my car, I had no idea it was actually going to save me from living a lie for the rest of my life. I steered my sedan through the winding streets of Myers Park. The elaborate Christmas lights on the mansions blurred past my window in streaks of gold and red. My mind replayed the image of Graham from an hour ago. He had stood on the stage, handing over a giant check, his arm tight around my waist for the photographers. He was perfect. He was the man who rescued stray dogs, built affordable housing complexes, and always knew the right thing to say. He was my Graham. I pulled into the driveway of our estate, Callaway Ridge. The automatic sensor triggered the floodlights, illuminating the sprawling brick facade. My breath hitched in my throat. Graham's sleek black Aston Martin was parked in the third bay of the garage. I frowned as I killed the engine. He had texted me just 10 minutes ago saying he was stuck in the VIP lounge with a potential investor and could not get away. I assumed he must have forgotten something important too. The house was silent when I entered. I unlocked the front door and stepped onto the marble foyer. The massive Christmas tree in the living room cast long, spindly shadows across the floor. Someone had turned the volume on the smart speakers all the way down, leaving only a faint rhythmic thumping of bass that barely registered in the air. It felt wrong. It felt like someone had hit the mute button in a blind panic. I heard a soft shuffle from the second floor. I kicked off my high heels to run up the carpeted stairs, assuming it was the housekeeper tidying up the suite. The door to our master bedroom was cracked open just an inch. I pushed it. The scene froze me in place. Graham was standing there. Facing away from me was a young woman in a floor-length crimson gown. His hands were not on her shoulders in a friendly manner. His fingers were deftly pulling up the zipper of her dress, and he was leaning in close enough to inhale the scent of her hair. The air in the room felt thick with the heat of two bodies that had been much closer only seconds before. Graham! The name left my mouth like a gunshot. He spun around. I watched the blood drain from his face instantly. He turned pale, a ghostly white that clashed violently with his black tuxedo. The girl gasped and clutched the front of her dress, shrinking away from him with wide, terrified eyes. I felt like a sledgehammer had slammed into my chest, my knees locked, refusing to let me move forward or backward. Graham did not apologize. He did not stumble. He stepped between me and the girl, his face hardening into a mask of calm authority. He walked right up to me and gripped my upper arms, his cologne overwhelming my senses. "Tori, stop! It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice dropping to that reasonable, soothing pitch he used on difficult clients. "She's the PR intern, her zipper jammed. I was just helping her fix it so she could get back to the party. I looked at him, breathless and dizzy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw his eyes out. But the terrifying part was that a small, broken piece of me wanted to believe him. The girl stepped out from behind Graham, clutching the silk of her bodice as if it were a lifeline. She looked barely old enough to rent a car, with wide, doe-like eyes that darted between me and my husband. I'm Ava Brooks, she stammered, her voice trembling. I was hired as the stylist for the gala. The agency sent me. I tried to focus on her face, but my gaze dropped to her neck. My stomach turned over. Resting against her collarbone was a delicate solitaire diamond pendant on a platinum chain. I knew every facet of that stone. Graham had clasped it around my neck on our 5th wedding anniversary, whispering that I was his rock. Now, it was warming the skin of a stranger in my own bedroom. That is my necklace, I whispered, the air leaving my lungs. Graham stepped forward, cutting off my line of sight. He did not look guilty. He looked annoyed, like a CEO dealing with a subordinate who had missed a deadline. Ava spilled champagne on her dress earlier, he said, his voice terrifyingly steady. She came here to clean up because the club facilities were crowded. I was just being a gentleman and helping her with a stuck zipper. The real question, Victoria, is why you abandoned your post in the middle of the most important night of the year I came for the hard drive, I managed to say, pointing a shaking finger at him. You are lying. You are? Oh, God. Graham, you are wearing your tuxedo shirt halfway unbuttoned. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He lowered his voice to a dangerous, silky whisper that only I could hear. Look around you, Tori. This house, it is in my name. That car in the driveway, my name. The credit card in your purse, my name. He tilted his head, his eyes devoid of any warmth. You are acting just like you did when you first moved here. Do you remember the crying jags, the pills? You are imagining things again. And quite frankly, your instability is becoming a liability. I am not imagining your hands on her. I cried out. I am not imagining the late nights, or the texts you hide. You are cheating on me, you are being paranoid. He barked, the sudden volume making me flinch. I am building an empire for us, and you are trying to tear it down because you are insecure. Do you have any idea how many investors are at that club right now? If you ruin my image with your hysterics, you ruin us. I looked past him at Ava. She was not smirking. She was pressing herself into the corner of the room, looking absolutely petrified. She did not look like a seductress. She looked like a trapped animal. Please, Mr. Calloway, Ava whispered, tears spilling over. I didn't know she was home. I just want to go. Please let me go. Her fear struck me as odd. It was not the fear of a woman caught sleeping with a married man. It was the fear of a woman who knew what Graham was capable of. Graham ignored her plea and fixed his gaze on me. You are going to fix your face. You are going to drive back to the club. If you disappear now, people will talk, and that will only make you look worse. Do you understand me? We are going to finish this night like a perfect, happy couple. I wanted to spit in his face. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered, but the weight of his threat, the mention of my past depression, and the sheer crushing reality of his financial control pinned me down. I felt small. I felt erased. Fine. I choked out. An hour later, I was standing in the shadows of the backstage wings at the Magnolia Crest Club. My makeup was retouched, hiding the red blotches on my cheeks. Graham stood center stage, bathed in the spotlight, holding the microphone with the easy grace of a king addressing his subjects. Success means nothing without someone to share it with, Graham said into the mic, his voice thick with fabricated emotion. Family is the greatest gift of this Christmas season. To my beautiful wife, Victoria, thank you for being my anchor. The applause was thunderous. I felt bile rise in my throat. The image of his hands sliding up the red fabric of Ava's dress played on a loop in my mind, flashing every time a camera bulb popped in the audience. I drove home alone after the gala. My hands shook so violently on the steering wheel that I nearly swerved into a ditch on Providence Road. Tears blurred my vision, turning the streetlights into watery streaks of light. As I pulled up to the security gate of the club to leave, the old guard, Mr. Henderson, lifted the barrier. He looked at my tear-streaked face. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just gave me a look of profound, weary sadness, as if he had seen this movie play out a dozen times before. I realized then, with a jolt of horror, that everyone outside might have seen the cracks I was too blind to notice. I walked into the silent house. The Christmas tree lights were still twinkling, indifferent to my shattered world. I sat on the sofa in the dark, still wearing my gown. I looked around at the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, and the perfect life I thought I had built. It was all a set, a meticulously designed stage, and I was the only actor who had not been given the real script. The days following Christmas were filled with a terrifying, suffocating normalcy. Graham became the model husband again. He filled the foyer with white hydrangeas, my favorite, and insisted on taking me to dinner at the Fig Tree to discuss us. He even suggested marriage counseling, holding my hand across the table with a look of such earnest concern that I almost vomited into my risotto. But amidst this charm offensive, he kept sliding paperwork across the kitchen island. "Just little things," he said. "Tax documents for the year-end audit. Investment portfolio rebalancing. Just sign here, babe," he said one Tuesday morning, tapping a manicured finger on a thick stack of legal-sized paper. "It is just to move some assets around for the tax break before the 31st. I uncapped my pen, my hand hovering over the signature line. In the past, I would have signed blindly, trusting his financial genius, but the image of him zipping Ava's dress flashed in my mind, a warning beacon. I flipped the page back, and then another. Buried in the dense legalese was an amendment to our prenuptial agreement. It was not a tax document. It was a modification that reduced my settlement share by 70% in the event of a divorce, specifically contingent on a clause regarding documented history of psychological instability. "Graham," I said, my voice shaking. "What is this?" He didn't even look up from his espresso. "Oh, that is just an old draft the lawyers slipped in by mistake. Ignore it. You are so tense lately. Tori, you are nitpicking everything." He snatched the papers away before I could read more, but the seed was planted. I realized with a sick feeling that I had signed dozens of papers like this over the last 5 years. How many rights had I signed away while he poured me wine and told me I was beautiful? That afternoon, he left his laptop open on the patio table. He never did that. I sat down, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened his email client. There, in a thread with his lead attorney, I found a message dated 3 days before Christmas. Subject: exit strategy and Skyline deal. The text read, "Wait until the Skyline acquisition closes in late March. We need to secure the asset before filing. In the meantime, continue to document her erratic behavior. We need to proactively build the narrative of her instability to trigger the competency clause." I slammed the laptop shut, gasping for air. This wasn't just a midlife crisis affair. This was an eviction. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was planning to dismantle my life, steal the wealth I had helped him build by hosting his galas and charming his investors, and then discard me as a crazy ex-wife. Panic set in, cold and sharp. I needed help. I called a divorce attorney a colleague had whispered about, a man named Mr. Sterling. I drove to his office in the pouring rain, desperate for an ally. Mr. Sterling listened to me for 10 minutes, his face unreadable. Then he folded his hands. Mrs. Calloway, he said smoothly, I have to be honest. My firm does a significant amount of consulting for Callaway Ridge Capital. Conflict of interest aside, Graham is a powerful man. If you go to war, everything comes out. Your medical history, the antidepressants, the therapy sessions from 5 years ago. My advice, choose the gentle solution. Sign what he offers. Do not let this get ugly. I walked out of his office feeling like the walls were closing in. The rain soaked my coat, chilling me to the bone. The entire city felt like it belonged to Graham. Every skyscraper, every law firm, every country club, they were all intricate parts of a machine designed to protect men like him and crush women like me. I stopped at a small coffee shop to stop my hands from shaking. In the restroom, while I was splashing cold water on my face, 2 women walked in, chatting loudly about a friend's divorce. Well, she is screwed, one woman said, reapplying her lipstick. She got Judge Harold Mercer. You know he plays golf with the Callaways every Sunday. He let that banker keep the vacation home and gave the wife nothing but the debt. If you are a rich man in this town, Mercer is your guardian angel. The name stuck in my head like a burr. Harold Mercer. When I got home, the house was dark. I grabbed the mail from the counter. There was a thick envelope from the Mecklenburg County Court. I tore it open with trembling fingers. It was a summons, a request for divorce mediation. Graham hadn't waited for the spring. He hadn't waited for me to sign the papers. I looked at the filing date, December 10th. He had filed this 2 weeks before the Christmas party, 2 weeks before he stood on stage and thanked me for being his anchor. And at the bottom of the page, in bold black ink, was the name of the assigned judge, the Honorable Harold D. Mercer. I slid down to the kitchen floor, the paper crumping in my fist. I wasn't just fighting a cheating husband. I had been drafted into a chess game that had started months ago, and I was already in checkmate. At 3 a.m, unable to sleep in the bed I now knew was a lie, I sat on the floor of the guest room scrolling through my phone. My thumb hovered over names of socialites and charity board members, people who would smile and immediately text Graham the moment I hung up. I kept scrolling until I reached the letter N. Naomi Price. We had not spoken in 3 years, not since she moved to New York to host a crime podcast that exposed corporate fraud. I remembered her as the girl in our dorm who could smell a lie from a mile away and who possessed a terrifying lack of fear when it came to powerful men. I pressed the call button. She answered on the second ring, her face appearing on the FaceTime screen, framed by messy hair and oversized glasses. Tori, she asked, her voice thick with sleep but instantly alert. It is 3 a.m. Is everything okay? I opened my mouth to say sorry, but instead, a sob ripped through my chest. I spent the next 20 minutes crying into the camera, unintelligible and broken. Naomi did not interrupt. She did not offer empty platitudes. She just watched, her eyes sharpening with every minute. When I finally choked out the last of my breath, she leaned into her camera. Okay, she said, her voice devoid of pity. You are done crying now. I have one question. Do you want to just survive this, or do you want to hit back? Really hit back. Naomi flew into Charlotte that weekend. We met at a dive bar called the Broken Spoke, a place with sticky floors and dim lighting, far away from the country club circuit. I told her everything. I told her about the scene in the bedroom, the modified prenuptial agreement hidden in the tax papers, the email about the exit strategy, and the terrifying fact that Graham had essentially hand-picked Judge Mercer. He made me stop taking my antidepressants last year, I confessed, staring into my gin and tonic. He said they made me look glazed. He said he missed the real me. Now I realize he just wanted me off them so I would look unstable when the pressure hit. Naomi slammed her hand on the table. This is not a divorce, Tori. This is a demolition. He is using a systemic abuse of power, financial coercion, and likely judicial corruption to erase you. She pulled out her phone. You cannot use a polite lawyer for this. You need a shark who eats other sharks. An hour later, I was standing in front of a brick building in a gentrifying part of town. The sign read Marquez and Hollis. It was worlds away from the glass and steel fortress of Graham's legal team. Inside, the office was cramped and smelled of coffee and old paper, but the walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings of legal victories against insurance giants and corrupt landlords. Selena Marquez was a small woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to X-ray my soul. She did not offer me tea. She sat me down and opened a yellow legal pad. Naomi gave me the headlines. Selena said, her pen poised, "I need the grit." "When exactly did you sign the first prenup? What dates did you see the email? How much liquidity do you have access to right now?" For the first time in weeks, someone was speaking to me in the language of war. Not pity. I answered her questions, my voice growing steadier with every detail. When I mentioned Judge Mercer, Selena stopped writing. She looked up, a dark smile playing on her lips. "Mercer," she said, testing the name like a piece of bad meat. "I have been waiting for a reason to go after him. Listen to me, Mrs. Calloway. If we take this case, we do not play defense. We attack the validity of the prenup. We demand full financial transparency, and we expose the conflict of interest between your husband and that judge. But if we start this, you cannot get scared and settle halfway through. You cannot fold." I looked at the two women, Naomi, who saw the crime, and Selena, who knew the law. Then I thought about the fear I had felt seeing my own face slashed in the wedding photo. I thought about Graham's cold, pale face as he zipped up another woman's dress in our home. I am not scared anymore. I said, "I am angry." I picked up the pen and signed the retainer agreement. The scratch of the ink on the paper sounded loud in the quiet room. It sounded like the first shot of a revolution. The mediation room at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse smelled of lemon floor wax and old fear. The air conditioning was cranked down so low that I could feel the goosebumps rising on my arms under my blazer. Between us sat a mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, acting as a physical border between two different worlds. On one side, Graham sat flanked by 4 attorneys in bespoke suits, their briefcases open like jaws. On my side, there was just Selena, her young paralegal, and me. Graham did not look at me. He looked at his watch, checking the time as if this were just a minor scheduling conflict between golf rounds. His lead counsel, a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, slid a folder across the table. "We are prepared to offer a very generous, one-time settlement of $500,000, the lawyer said smoothly. "In exchange, Mrs. Calloway will waive all claims to Calloway Ridge Capital Equity and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the dissolution of the marriage. If she agrees, Mr. Calloway will graciously decline to petition for a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation." My stomach turned. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat. "Take the crumbs and leave, or we will brand you as insane." Selena didn't even blink. She pushed the folder back. "We are not here for hush money. We require a full forensic accounting of all marital assets." We also contested the validity of the prenuptial amendment signed on December 12th, as my client was under the influence of medication prescribed by a doctor on Mr. Calloway's payroll and signed under duress. A ripple of amused laughter went through Graham's side of the table. Graham finally looked at me, a smirk playing on his lips, as if I were a child trying to sit at the adults' table. Then Judge Harold Mercer walked in for the preliminary review. He was a large man with a flushed face and snowy white hair, the kind of man who looked like a kindly grandfather until you saw the hardness in his eyes. He greeted Graham with a nod that was far too familiar. "Your Honor." Selena started, standing up straighter. "We have concerns regarding a conflict of interest due to the personal relationship between Ms. Marquez." Mercer cut her off, his voice booming. Let us not waste the court's time with gossip. We are here to dissolve a marriage, not to indulge in conspiracy theories. He turned his gaze to me. It felt like being examined by a butcher deciding which cut of meat to discard. "Young lady," Mercer said, his tone dripping with faux concern. "My advice, take the offer. Avoid the ugliness. You do not want to drag your personal struggles into the public record during the holiday season. It would be a shame to embarrass yourself and Mr. Calloway further." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. Selina tried to argue for a 90-day discovery period to trace the funds. Mercer waved a hand dismissively. "Denied. You have 30 days. Keep the scope limited to joint accounts. We are not going to turn Mr. Calloway's business upside down on a fishing expedition. 30 days, restricted to joint accounts." It was a death sentence for our case. Graham kept his money in shell companies and offshore trusts. The joint accounts were just for groceries. I walked out of the courtroom feeling like my legs were made of lead. The hallway was crowded with strangers, the sound of shoes clicking on marble echoing loudly. I leaned against a wall, trying to breathe. Graham appeared next to me. He stood close, invading my space, smelling of expensive sandalwood and cruelty. "I can still stop this. Tori," he whispered, leaning down to my ear. "Just sign the papers. Go back to being the sweet girl I married. If you keep pushing, well, I would hate for everyone to see just how sick you really are. I have the files. Tori, the nights you couldn't stop crying, the panic attacks, I will put every single one of them on the 6 o'clock news." He patted my shoulder, a gesture of ownership, and walked away. That night, I collapsed on the floor of my new, empty apartment. My chest constricted so tightly I thought I was having a heart attack. My hands shook uncontrollably, rattling the glass of water I tried to drink. I hated myself in that moment. I hated that my body was betraying me, trembling and gasping, proving exactly what Graham had said. I was unstable. I was broken. I dialed a crisis hotline, just to hear a human voice tell me I wasn't crazy. But even as I spoke, I felt like a fraud. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Naomi. "Tori," she said, her voice sharp and awake. "I have good news and bad news. The good news is that we found a crack. The bad news is, it is right on top of a federal judge." Back in New York. Naomi turned her apartment into a war room, while I was trying to keep myself from shattering in Charlotte. She was pulling threads that unraveled the entire tapestry of the local judicial system. She used her journalist credentials to access databases I did not even know existed, cross-referencing property records with obscure corporate filings. 2 days later, she called me. Her voice was buzzing with the unique adrenaline of a reporter who had just found the smoking gun. "I found a limited liability company called Hemingway Oaks Consulting," Naomi said. "It is registered in Delaware to a trust managed by Judge Mercer's brother-in-law. On paper, it is a consulting firm for logistics. But guess who is their biggest client?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Graham, a subsidiary of Callaway Ridge Capital," she confirmed. "They have been paying Hemingway Oaks monthly retainers of $15,000 for advisory services for the last 3 years. And Tori, there is a source at the courthouse. They told me to look at Mercer's travel logs. She sent a spreadsheet to my secure email. It was a timeline. Every time Mercer went on a golf trip to Florida or the Hamptons, a significant ruling in a high-asset divorce case followed within 2 weeks. The rulings always favored the husband. The trips were always sponsored by corporate entities linked to those same husbands. "This is a pattern," Naomi said. "It is pay-to-play justice." We forwarded everything to Selina. Her eyes lit up like she had been handed a sword. She decided not to leak it to the press yet. Instead, she wanted to file a motion for judicial review, forcing Mercer to go on record denying the connection before we dropped the hammer. It was a trap. Just as we were preparing the motion, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Ava. Please, I need to talk to you. I have things you need to hear." My first instinct was to throw the phone across the room. I did not want to see the face of the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. But Selena stopped me. "She is the variable Graham thinks he has under control," Selena said. "If she is reaching out, the chain is breaking. Go." I met Ava at a coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, far from the country club crowd. She looked terrible. She wore no makeup, and her eyes were red-rimmed. She didn't look like a femme fatale. She looked like a college student who had failed a final exam. "He told me he was my mentor," Ava whispered, her hands gripping her coffee cup. "He said he saw potential in my styling work. He introduced me to designers, got me the contract for the gala. I thought he respected me. I didn't know he was just grooming me." I sat silently, fighting the urge to reach across the table and shake her. "I didn't know about the money or the judges," she continued, her voice trembling. "But one night, about a month ago, he was drunk. He was on the phone with someone. I recorded it because he was scaring me, and I wanted proof if he tried to fire me later." She slid her phone across the table. I pressed play. The audio was grainy, but Graham's voice was unmistakable. It was thick with scotch and arrogance. "Don't worry about the filings. I sent the transfer to Hemingway Oaks yesterday. Just make sure Mercer understands what I expect on the back end. I need this clean." The recording ended. The silence between us was deafening. Graham wasn't just influencing the judge, he was buying a verdict. "And there is this," Ava said, scrolling to a text thread. "He sent this to me the night you came home early. I read the message on the screen. 'Stupid wife came back for a hard drive. Ruined the mood. Don't worry, babe. The divorce is just a technicality at this point. Once the spring deal closes, I will flush her out of the system and we can stop hiding.'" I stared at the words "stupid wife" and "flush her out." For a moment, my anger flared white-hot. But then I looked up at Ava. She was shaking. She was 22 years old, terrified, and realizing she had been used as a prop in a game much larger than her. "He doesn't love you," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "And he didn't love me. We are just accessories, Ava. I was the wife to build his image, and you are the mistress to stroke his ego. We are both disposable to him." "I will testify," Ava said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I don't want to be part of this. I want him to stop winning." I took a deep breath. For the first time, I realized that the third person in this marriage wasn't the girl sitting across from me. It was the system that men like Graham built to ensure they never had to lose. The victory with Ava felt short-lived, just hours after I saved her confession on 3 separate encrypted drives. Graham launched a counteroffensive that was so subtle and vicious it took me a moment to realize I was bleeding. It started with the emails. My phone pinged incessantly with notifications from Graham. The subject lines were innocuous: "Concerned about your well-being or resources for help." Inside, he had written long, pleading paragraphs about how worried he was regarding my manic episodes. Copying a Dr. Eris, a psychiatrist I had never met, he was creating a paper trail, writing to an audience of future judges, framing my righteous anger as a mental breakdown. "We need to schedule an evaluation. Tori," the email read. "I just want to ensure you are safe with yourself." 2 hours later, the red and blue strobe of police lights flashed against my living room curtains. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the door to find 2 uniformed officers. "Ma'am, we received an anonymous call stating that a female resident at this address was threatening self-harm," the older officer said, his hand resting near his belt. I stood there in my pajamas, humiliated and terrified. I realized Graham was not just gaslighting me privately anymore. He was weaponizing the police to build a public record of my instability. "I am fine," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "My husband and I are going through a contentious divorce. He is trying to intimidate me." The officers left, but the damage was done. the report would exist. Subject appeared agitated. The attack did not stop at my home, at Bright Nest, the sanctuary I had built with my own hands. The board called an emergency meeting. The chairman, a man who played golf with Graham every Saturday, slid a piece of paper across the table. "Victoria, given the personal strain you are under," he said, avoiding my eyes, "we think it might be best if you took a 6-month sabbatical. We can't have your private volatility affecting the Foundation's image." I felt the room spinning. This was the only thing I had left that was mine. Graham had whispered in their ears, "poisoning the well." I opened my mouth to argue, but Lorraine, the owner of an independent bookstore and the only board member who drove a Honda, slammed her hand on the table. "This is absurd," Lorraine said, staring down the chairman. "I saw Graham Calloway at the gala. I saw him gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. I saw him drag her out of the room. We are not going to fire a woman because her husband is a bully with a checkbook, unless you have proof of misconduct. She stays." The room went silent. I looked at Lorraine, tears stinging my eyes. It was the first time a stranger had stood between me and the abyss. Selena was furious when I called her. "Record everything," she ordered. "Every welfare check is harassment. Every email is evidence of coercion. He thinks he is burying you, but if we survive this, he is digging his own grave." Graham seemed to sense I wasn't folding. That night, at 2 a.m, my phone rang. "Stop the charade with Naomi and that lawyer." Graham's voice came through the speaker, low and venomous. "If you don't, I will read your entire medical history in open court, every therapy note from 5 years ago, every prescription. I will make sure the newspapers know exactly how many pills you used to take just to get out of bed. Do you want the whole city to know you are damaged goods?" I hung up, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the phone. The final blow came 2 days later. I returned to my apartment after a meeting with Selena. The hallway was quiet, but as I reached my unit, I saw it. The front door was ajar. I pushed it open with a trembling hand. The apartment was untouched. The TV was there. My laptop was there. But on the coffee table, lying face up, was a framed wedding photo I hadn't had the heart to throw away yet. The glass was shattered, and a single clean slice from a razor blade had been cut across my face, severing my head from my body in the picture. There was no note. There didn't need to be one. "I can get to you anytime I want." I collapsed onto the floor, hyperventilating. The walls felt like they were closing in. I reached for my phone to call Graham, to tell him I would sign anything, that I would leave the state, that I would disappear if he just stopped hunting me. But Naomi was there before I could dial. She had come over with takeout, finding me sobbing on the rug. She locked the door and sat with me through the night, watching the street from the window. "If you stop now," Naomi said, her voice hard as steel, "if you let him win this way, everything he did becomes a template. Every other Graham Calloway out there will see that they can destroy a woman just by calling her crazy and throwing money at a judge." I looked at the shattered photo on the table. Then I looked at the string of Christmas lights I had hung on the balcony, the only festive thing I had kept. I thought about Ava. I thought about the police at my door. I thought about the fear I had lived in for 7 years. I don't just want to escape. "Naomi," I whispered, the panic in my chest solidifying into something cold and heavy. I want him to feel every ounce of fear he used to scare me. The week began with the quiet shuffle of paper that sounded like thunder in the distance. Selena walked into the clerk's office and formally filed a motion requesting Judge Harold Mercer's recusal from my divorce case. The grounds were specific: a conflict of interest regarding financial ties to entities associated with the plaintiff. We knew the odds of him stepping down voluntarily were almost zero. Judges like Mercer did not surrender power. They had to be torn away from it. At the same time, 300 miles away in New York, Naomi was opening a second front. She met with an old contact from the Attorney General's office, a man she had helped on a racketeering story years ago. She handed him a sanitized version of our findings, no names yet, just the raw data of the transfers and the timeline of the rulings. "I am not asking you to raid the courthouse," Naomi told him. "I am asking you to look at the math. The math does not lie." It didn't take long for the gears to turn. Deep inside the state capitol, investigators began overlaying Mercer's travel logs with the bank statements of Hemingway Oaks Consulting. They found 3 other divorces in the last 2 years that fit the pattern perfectly: a wealthy husband, a decimated wife, and a significant consulting fee paid within 10 days of the final judgment. The recusal hearing was set for Thursday. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with suppressed hostility. Judge Mercer did not sit back in his chair this time. He leaned over the bench, his face flushed a deep, angry crimson. "Ms. Marquez," Mercer bellowed, his voice echoing off the wood paneling. "This motion is bordering on contempt. You are attacking the integrity of this court based on rumors and conspiracy theories. I suggest you withdraw it immediately before I sanction you for wasting my time." I sat at the table, my hands clasped tightly to stop them from shaking. I looked back at Graham. He looked bored, checking his cuticles, confident that his paid-for protection would hold. Selina did not flinch. She stood taller, smoothing her skirt. "Your Honor, I am not relying on rumors," Selina said, her voice projecting clearly to the court reporter. "I am relying on bank records that show monthly transfers of $15,000 from Callaway Ridge subsidiaries to an entity known as Hemingway Oaks Consulting." The silence that followed was absolute. At the mention of the name Hemingway Oaks, I heard a sharp intake of breath behind me. I turned my head slightly. Graham had frozen. The bored expression had vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. He stared at the back of Selina's head as if he wanted to strangle her, for the first time. He realized we weren't just guessing. We had the ledger. "I am simply asking the court to clarify the relationship," Selina continued. Relentless. "If there is no relationship, then the record will reflect that. But the numbers exist." "Your Honor." Mercer stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. He knew he was trapped. If he sanctioned her now, he would look like he was covering up a crime. If he answered, he perjured himself. "I will. Take this motion under advisement," Mercer finally gritted out, slamming his gavel with unnecessary force. "We will reconvene next week. But make no mistake, Ms. Marquez, you are walking a very thin line." He did not recuse himself. He did not remove my case from his docket. He was trying to buy time, to figure out how much we knew and how to bury it. We walked out of the courthouse into the biting wind. Graham stormed past us without a word, his phone already pressed to his ear, his stride frantic. He didn't even look at me. He was too busy trying to save his own skin. 3 days later, Naomi called me. Her voice was low and serious. "Tori," she said, "it is happening. The Attorney General's office just officially opened a sealed investigation into Hemingway Oaks and judicial misconduct in Mecklenburg County. They are subpoenaing the bank records." I stood on my balcony, looking out at the Charlotte skyline. For months, I had felt like I was standing in the middle of a hurricane, with the wind tearing at my face, pushing me backward every time I tried to take a step. But as I watched the clouds move over the city, I felt a shift. The wind was still cold. It was still blowing hard. But for the first time, it was hitting my back, pushing me forward, and blowing straight into the face of Graham Callaway. The studio was small and soundproofed, a padded cell of our own making. Naomi sat across from me, adjusting the levels on her mixing board. We had spent the last 48 hours recording, editing, and scrubbing metadata. We called the series The Gavel's Price. When I spoke into the microphone, my voice was modulated down to a deep, unrecognizable electronic hum, stripping away my identity but leaving the truth of my words intact. We waited for the signal from the Attorney General. Selena told us, her eyes glued to her phone. They executed the sealed search warrants on the Hemingway Oaks offices at 6 in the morning. They have the servers. We are clear to broadcast. Naomi hit the upload button. The reaction was not a ripple, it was a tidal wave. By noon, the hashtag Hemingway Oaks was trending locally on Twitter and Facebook. The comment sections were flooded with people connecting the dots, women who had lost custody battles, small business owners who had been crushed in court, and paralegals who had seen things they were too scared to report. They all started talking. The silence Graham had bought was shattered by the noise of 1,000 keyboards. The next morning, I watched the news from my laptop. Reporters had swarmed the lawn of Judge Harold Mercer's colonial estate. The front door opened, and Mercer stepped out, attempting to look dignified in a cashmere sweater. "These allegations are baseless," Mercer told the press, his voice sounding thin in the cold air. "I have served this county with honor for 30 years, but the camera zoomed in. His right hand, clutching the railing of his porch, was trembling violently. He did not look like the titan who had sneered at me in the courtroom. He looked like an old man who heard the wolves scratching at his door. Graham was next. My phone began to vibrate at 8 in the morning and did not stop. It buzzed across the coffee table like an angry insect. The voicemail icon climbed steadily. 10 messages. 20. He was panicking. His investors, the board at Bright Nest, and his partners were undoubtedly demanding answers about why their respectable real estate firm was being linked to a judicial slush fund. I did not answer. I let the silence stretch, tight and unbearable, for 2 full days. Finally, a message came through that made me pause. "Meet me at the Omni conference room. Just us. No lawyers. I want to end this peacefully. I want to give you what you want. Go," Selena said, handing me a small, high-fidelity recording device disguised as a pen. "But you are not going alone. I will be in the adjoining room with the door cracked. We need him to say it." The conference room was sterile, smelling of lemon polish and stale air conditioning. Graham was sitting at the head of the long table. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, and there were dark circles carved under his eyes. When I walked in, he stood up, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Tori," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him, "thank you for coming. This whole thing has gotten out of hand, hasn't it?" I sat down, placing my clutch on the table. I did not smile back. "You wanted to talk. Graham, talk." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know I hurt you. The thing with Ava, it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, but this investigation, it is going to destroy everything we built. It is going to destroy the foundation, the company, everything." He slid a check across the table. It was face down. "I am prepared to offer you $5 million, Graham said, his voice low and urgent. "Tax-free, immediate transfer, and I will sign whatever statement regarding your mental health you want. I will take full emotional responsibility." I looked at the check, then up at him. "And what do I have to do?" "Sign a non-disclosure agreement," he said quickly. "And, well, we need to contextualize the payments to Hemingway Oaks. If we can agree that Mercer solicited those funds without my full knowledge, that perhaps he pressured the firm," I felt a chill run down my spine. He wasn't just trying to buy me off. He was planning to frame Judge Mercer. He was ready to feed his own ally to the prosecutors to save himself. "So," I said slowly, ensuring my voice was clear, "you want me to take the money, shut up, and help you blame the bribery scheme entirely on the judge you used to threaten me. Mercer is old. Tori," Graham said, leaning in, his eyes pleading. "He is done anyway. Why should I go down with him? We can both walk away from this, Winters. You get the money, I get my company back. Please, be reasonable." I looked at him, really looked at him for the last time. I saw the cowardice behind the charm. I saw a man who had no loyalty to his wife, his mistress, or his partner's. "Graham," I said, my voice steady, "do you know what your biggest mistake was? You thought I was weak because I loved you." I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a pen. I pulled out my phone, which had been recording the entire time, and placed it face up on the mahogany table. The timer on the screen was ticking red. "Did you ever think for a single second," I asked, "that I was smart enough to stop fearing you?" Graham stared at the phone. The blood drained from his face, leaving him as pale as he had been the night I caught him zipping up that dress. He realized the check meant nothing. He realized he had just confessed to conspiring to obstruct justice and framing a federal judge. I stood up. I didn't take the check. "Selena has the audio," I said to his horrified face. "And Naomi is waiting in the lobby." I walked out of the room. The sound of the heavy door clicking shut behind me was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It sounded like the final nail being driven into a coffin. Judge Harold Mercer was suspended 48 hours before our final court date. The news broke like a thunderclap over the city, stripping Graham of his home field advantage. My case was reassigned to Judge Elena Bradford, a woman known for her ironclad intolerance for corruption and her background as the daughter of a steelworker. She did not owe favors to the country club set, and Graham knew it. I walked into the courtroom wearing a simple charcoal suit I had bought off the rack at a department store. It was not the designer armor Graham used to force me to wear, but for the first time in years, I felt like myself. Outside, the reporters were not shouting questions about the crazy wife. They were asking about the Calloway-Mercer connection. The narrative had flipped. Selena wasted no time demolishing the image of the unstable woman Graham had meticulously constructed. She presented my diaries, the logs of the anonymous hotline calls, and the police reports from the welfare checks. This was not a concern for her health, Selena argued, her voice echoing in the silent room. This was a systematic campaign of coercive control, gaslighting, and intimidation designed to weaponize her medical history against her. Then Ava took the stand. She was trembling, but she did not look down. She testified about how Graham recruited vulnerable young women, how he used his power to silence them, and the dinners she had attended where judges were discussed like investments. When she played the recording of Graham boasting about having someone to handle the court, the room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Naomi followed as an expert witness. She didn't use emotional language. She used math. She projected a timeline on the screen showing the transfers from Callaway Ridge to Hemingway Oaks Consulting, overlaid with the dates of Mercer's favorable rulings. "The pattern is statistically impossible to be a coincidence," Naomi stated. "Money left Mr. Callaway's control, entered a shell company, and landed in the accounts of the judge's family members within 10 days of every major verdict. Graham's team tried a desperate final gambit. They called a psychiatrist to the stand to reevaluate my competency. Selena destroyed him in cross-examination, revealing that his evaluation of me had lasted only 20 minutes over a Zoom call and had been scheduled and paid for by Graham's personal attorney. The testimony crumbled into a farce. When Graham finally took the stand, he tried to play the role that had always worked for him, the long-suffering, benevolent husband. "Your Honor," Graham said, his voice thick with practiced sorrow. "I am just a man who tried to help his wife. I still love her." Despite her confusion, Judge Bradford leaned forward. She did not smile. "Mr. Calloway," she cut him off, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "Spare me the sentiment. Explain the email where you instructed your lawyer to build a narrative of instability. Explain the $50,000 sent to Hemingway Oaks last November." Graham froze. Under the harsh neon lights of the courtroom, I saw beads of sweat break out on his forehead. The mask slipped. For the first time, the court saw him not as a titan of industry, but as a cornered liar. Judge Bradford delivered her ruling from the bench. She declared the prenuptial agreement void due to evidence of fraud and duress. She awarded me a significant settlement, including a substantial percentage of shares in Callaway Ridge to ensure I was compensated for the years I spent building his image. Furthermore, Judge Bradford said, looking directly at Graham, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against you regarding Mrs. Callaway, and let the record show that the evidence presented here today regarding Hemingway Oaks is being transferred immediately to the District Attorney's Office for a criminal investigation. Graham slumped in his chair. He looked small. I walked out of the courthouse and into the crisp winter air. The reporters surged forward, but they rushed past me, shouting Graham's name as he exited behind me, flanked by lawyers who could no longer save him. I stopped on the steps and took a deep breath. The man who had turned pale when I caught him was now going to live in the shadow of his own actions. That night, in my new apartment, I opened my banking app. The settlement transfer was pending. I initiated a transaction of my own. I sent a check to the Bright Nest Foundation to establish a specific grant for women escaping financial abuse. It was my final act of revenge. It was silent. It was permanent. And it turned my story into a weapon for every woman who came after me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to chat and hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.